the microphones are too hot or too cold, but Natalie's going to give it a shot till it feeds back.
Hey everyone, welcome to Be Ready Orcas. It is May already, 2019, and I just wanted to give a shout out for our next presentation, which is going to be on June 12th, which is Wednesday at 5:30, and we'll be talking with Nathan Donnelly about fire, all things fire. So things are getting a little drier out, and it's a great time to be talking about that. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Corey.
Fantastic. I am scared of microphones.
Here, wait, turn it up.
Turn it off here. Boom. There. Yep. I'm going to pick up Gregg's here. Anyway, hi. Thanks for coming, everybody. Again, let's see. Last meeting was with Paul Kamen and Water, and what a fantastic meeting it was. That information, I believe, was uploaded and mailed out to everybody. The videos are available. I got a head shaking no. I swear I saw a 3-part video that was released, so if you didn't get it, make sure you're signed up. You're getting the emails for the, it was on there, check it again. Anyway, that was great. Next meeting is fire. This meeting is, you all know, communications. Different forms, that's an excited woohoo. I'm just going to get into it. We have to be done by 6:30. I'm going to let everybody know so we don't look like meanies up here. 6:30 we have to wrap the meeting, and 6:45 we need to be reset because the fire department has drill tonight in this room. So if you can keep that in mind at the end. Without further ado, Gregg Hancock is here to talk to us about communication and universal solar flare disasters.
Oh, we're going to go into that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that one.
Yeah.
We'll save the solar flare thing for Q&A, I think. I don't want to start with something really depressing. Thank you, Corey. And thank you, Natalie, also for inviting me to speak tonight. Yeah, I'm really into communications. I'm really excited about this subject. So hopefully I'll help you become excited about it too. I don't know. So let's see. Just a brief bit about me. I have a business here on Orcas Island called Grid Insight. I do engineering for the utility industry. Primarily I design wireless radios used for automated meter reading. That's not why I'm here tonight. As a avocation, I'm an amateur radio operator, and I volunteer with the Auxiliary Communications Service of San Juan County that operates the sort of last line of defense for when all other communication systems fail. So that's why I'm here this evening. With me also is Alan Smith from Rock Island. We'll be jumping in a little bit later to talk about some things related to internet and how that may or may not function in a disaster. So we'll look forward to that. Let's see. Pardon me, I didn't have a ton of time to practice this, so I'm going to work from notes tonight. What we will cover. So emergency communications in general is just communications when everything's going to hell. So under extreme circumstances, in a disaster, when all the primary systems aren't working right, that makes it emergency communications. Something that I think most of you are aware of, but I'll just mention it to make sure that we're all on the same page. The guidance from our San Juan County Department of Emergency Management, at least to the amateur radio community, is that we should plan for 2 months without power in the case of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And I think that's the big thing that we're all sort of worried about. We can talk a little bit about extreme solar storms as well. And that's something we don't think about too much, but could be like the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, but much worse. So that's fun. But in these kinds of situations, we're really talking about life safety type of stuff, right? You're not going to be streaming Game of Thrones. Yeah, exactly. You're not going to be streaming Game of Thrones when we're just trying to hang on with no power and possibly no deliveries of supplies to the island for a while. So that is getting alerted when there's some sort of imminent threat. Staying informed as the threat has passed and things are not in great shape, so you can know if there's aid coming to the island or not. It also just helps us emotionally to know what the heck's going on in the world. If there's some sort of personal emergency that happens and the rest of the system, the basic communication systems are down, how can you still call for help? Is there a way to still call for help if your phone's not working? if we are going to be using some backup electronic devices, I've got some up here. How are you going to power them if the power grid is down? How to possibly, if we can, update our family and friends that might live out of state to let them know that, yeah, there was a big earthquake, yeah, there was a tsunami, whatever you're seeing on CNN may be really scary, but actually I'm fine. They might want to know. And finally, if you've got all that covered and you feel like you're all set, we're going to talk about how you might be able to volunteer to help, because we can always use more helpers to do communication stuff. And as I said, it's really kind of fun. If you're techie at all or into science, or you just like volunteering, helping the community, the amateur radio community, the fire departments, I think would love to have your assistance. So, starting with getting alerted. Some of you may remember from back in the day, the drills that got ran on the radio. This is a test, this is only a test of the emergency broadcast system. Okay, that still exists, but it has changed forms a little bit. We now have the integrated public alert and warning system, which contains all that FM, AM, TV alerting stuff that you might have seen before, but has been expanded into new media. So it also now includes wireless emergency alerts, which go to your cell phones. You might have seen these come across, maybe an Amber Alert if a child has been abducted. So that still exists. Hopefully you have a phone that carries those. You may not be familiar with weather radios, but if you don't have one, we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a second. And how do we know that this works? Well, in last year, you may have noticed in the news, a inbound missile was targeted at Hawaii, and you probably heard about this. And for about 43 minutes, the entire state of Hawaii thought they were going to die because this system was triggered, and it worked really, really, really well. Everyone knew, and I'm sure it was not a very pleasant emotional experience to go through, but it has been tested and does function. So you can count on that letting us know. So talking about weather radios. Question real quick, how many people actually have a weather radio with alert capability in their house today? Okay, not horrible. The rest of you, I hope at our next meeting will be able to raise your hands and say, I have one too. The thing that's great about these particular type of radios, well, let me tell you a little story, I think. So you might remember there was a earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan in 2011, the Tohoku earthquake. Pretty big deal, right? Well, you might not have known that that affected some of us here on the West Coast. I wasn't living in San Juan County at the time. I was living down in Sausalito, California. I was living in a houseboat, and that earthquake struck Japan in the middle of the night. Well, shortly after it struck Japan, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, I believe that's the right name, sent out an emergency alert, and my weather radio went off, and my God, did it go off. The alarm on that thing is, I was going to bring it and set it off, but I was afraid some of you who have medical conditions might not appreciate that. We jumped up out of bed and knew this was happening right away, and my wife and I had a chance to scratch our heads a little bit and say, okay, we're on a houseboat in San Francisco Bay. They just sent out a tsunami warning for San Francisco Bay, and it's going to hit here in about 5 hours. What are we going to do? Well, I think we were one of the only few in the houseboat community that actually got that warning. But we packed up our critical stuff in a big tub, and by the time dawn came around, we were up on top of the Marin Headlands looking out at San Francisco Bay on a park bench, watching the wave come in. It wasn't a massively destructive wave by the time it got to the West Coast, but it was still a wave, and it was enough that all of the boats in the bay were pushed one direction as it came in, and all the boats in the bay were pushed the other direction as it went out, and a bunch of them were grounded, and there was enough current through the houseboat community that had tide been higher, it would have started ripping houseboats off their moorings. So that's a pretty big deal considering we're on the other side of the ocean, but the weather radio worked. So get one. By the way, I like the CL100 from Sanji, and it's mentioned on the handout. Pick one up. Another thing, not quite as reliable necessarily as a weather radio, which only requires that the transmitter be in place and the batteries in your radio are working. But if you don't have the FEMA alerting application installed on your smartphone already, go install it. Super easy. Instructions for that are also on the handout. It includes all the same things that would come across your weather radio when they go to your phone. There's also stuff there for getting help if you happen to be in a disaster, but hopefully we'll never need that capability. Some of you might not think that social media is useful in this context, but actually for our island, because a lot of the things that might affect us more frequently are going to be pretty small and localized, they won't make it into the big alerting system. So you're going to need to find out about it by talking to someone. Maybe you'll get a robocall from a Palco, maybe not. But most of our local emergency folks, people tied to infrastructure and whatnot, have social media accounts. I really think Twitter is the preferred platform for this for two big reasons. One, if you don't like creating accounts, you don't want to give up your privacy of having a social media account, you can still get access to all this Twitter information just by plugging it into your web browser, no account required. So that's really handy. Number two is, if you do sign up for a Twitter account, and say you have it on your phone, you can register that device, or register that device to alert you audibly for specific accounts. So for example, whenever Opalco sends out a Twitter alert, it'll beep. Well, it might be a great thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night and lets you know, hey, the power's out, by the way, and it's going to be out for the next 8 hours. So that's handy, and it's not perfect, but it's about the best we have for local style alerting. These accounts are also listed on the handout. So, still not enough to keep you, let's back up a second. So that was alerting. Beyond the event, staying informed. Let's see. All the things you would think of, I won't spend a lot of time on this. Your weather radio is still really handy. FM radio in a smaller disaster is going to be handy. If everything local is out and you're not picking up any news from standard broadcast sources, AM radio at night works pretty well over long distances, so try that if you can't get anything else. Certainly all the satellite sources, if you have the power to run them, are going to be good ways to get information. And a radio scanner, some of you may have these, is a way to pick up local traffic from emergency responder dispatch, ham radio, some other folks that you know, it's not news, but it might give you enough information to know what's going on if you don't have anything else. The thing about scanners, they're pretty expensive, they're a little tricky to use, so I wouldn't say go out and buy one immediately, but if you're kind of nerdy and into that sort of thing, it might be something you want to play with. Okay, briefly let's talk about our telephone system a little bit, because to understand why you might not be able to make a 911 call, it might be good to sort of have a picture for how this system functions on the other end. So you're all familiar with the things on the left-hand side, right? I mean, you've got a phone, you've got maybe a DSL router from CenturyLink. This stuff's gonna be mostly CenturyLink related. We'll pull Alan in just a minute. The copper wire that connects your house goes to a box that has a digital loop carrier hardware in it that aggregates those signals and sends them out to a central office, which will recognize this is downtown East Sound. And then that signal gets routed through a subsea fiber optic cable over to Anacortes, over to the I-5 corridor, and down to Seattle. So anywhere along that network, a line could break. CenturyLink has gone and provided a microwave backup link so that if the fiber optic cable gets cut, they can still carry voice over to Bellingham, but that's not enough to carry all the internet stuff. So this has happened before, you've all experienced it. That's how it works. But key things to note here, battery backup. The digital loop carrier box only has 4 hours of battery in it, plus or minus. So unless you're in town and connected directly to the central office, and that's only within a mile or two of being in town, you're going through one of those and your phone and your DSL is going to fail somewhere around 4 hours. Might go a little bit longer, might be a little less. The central office has a diesel generator attached to it. That'll run for officially 2 days. Folks think it'll probably run for more like 5 or 6. If it's refueled and we have access to diesel coming out of the island, it'll just keep going. If not, it's going to shut down after 6 days. So that's more or less how CenturyLink type telco works. Alan, you want to jump in and talk a little bit about Rock Island?
Sure. The main difference between CenturyLink's infrastructure and ours is just that we don't use a copper network. We're all on fiber, which means if you're using voice through Rock Island Internet, which is VoIP, is it picking up that way? Better? Okay. You're going to be relying on some of the same, similar points. We have to have cabinets that aggregate signal and bring it back to central POPs, and those, like the CenturyLink equipment, are run on battery. We put as a standard an 8-hour battery system on those, and that's actually required by the FCC, which is, it's interesting. A lot of the DSLAM work out there is a little bit old, antiquated, it hasn't been upgraded lately, but 8 hours is the minimum, and that's because of 911 calling. And that's just a standard. They're actually talking about pushing that to 24 hours in the coming years, which is, I think, a smart thing to do. But each site, active site we call them, they're backed up by generation also. They can take a portable generator right now, which we have been out there in the middle of the night during those outages, putting those things on, keep the system up and going. But most of them are getting on-site generators installed so that they're ready to go for longer periods of time. The quick point just on the way the network works, you know, I used to be a little bit more naive too, and when we had the break from CenturyLink a few years ago, and we all suffered that multiple day outage, that break was between two islands, but the traffic in our county, so when you pick up the phone, you call your friend that's next door on Orcas, your call routes through Friday Harbor and then back. So it actually had to travel over that. So that's why your phone stopped working even if you were calling on the same island. So even though the CO on Orcas is here, the routing of that traffic has to go back over to Friday Harbor before it returns to your neighbor and their phone rings. The nice thing about the voice over internet protocol is the routing can change just with a simple network design. So you can have backup paths that are all redundant, and as long as you still have one of those paths running, that phone will still work and ring. Granted, that is if the other person you're calling is on that same network. So there's definitely more flexibility in some of the newer systems. Like that's one reason why I think it's important to consider voice like VoIP phones. Some people we talk to really want to hold on to their analog because that it's like a security blanket. You know, when the power went out, we're like, well, yeah, but my phone still works. But you know what Gregg's brought to attention is that only can last so long, and there are limitations to the redundancy of that network. And is that network being improved or upgraded? And the answer right there is not now. It hasn't been for the most part, but the VoIP systems are really dynamic. I mean, you don't even have to be here in the county. I mean, you can tether that to your device and be somewhere else in the country. I mean, it's really flexible in how you can contact individuals too. So what we do, because of we can't provide battery power to the phone that you're dialing over the VoIP system with. So we actually provide battery backup at your modem. So if you've got a connection with us either on fixed wireless or on fiber, we supply you a battery for your phone specifically. So that will keep that up and running. Now, if you had generation at your home, it's always going to work just like we'll have generation on our sites. But similar concept, but I would say more flexibility, better failover on the routing, especially since CenturyLink has a single cable between San Juan and Lopez, a single cable between Orcas and Shaw to Lopez, whereas the ring network that Opalco and Rock Island is working off of is dual connections on all of those. So you've got a failover in case of a major submarine break, and on top of that, radio communication backup too. So again, those are limited, just like CenturyLink. Capacity is a problem when you move to radios, but we still can carry voice traffic. And that's actually one of the things that we do. So when the power goes out or there's a cut in communications and we have to fail over to a backup microwave link, it's really important when we're in those situations that kind of people are understanding of what to do and what not to do. And I think there's going to be a few things said here tonight that I really hope you take home and consider. You know, like Gregg mentioned, you know, you're not going to be jumping on and watching Game of Thrones, and we hope you don't either, because you know there's a good reason to keep the throughput and bandwidth open for emergency reasons, voice communications, keeping people who need to talk talking. Because we get to manage and operate the LTE system that's out here that has been built over the last few years, we have a pretty good understanding of how it works. Your cell phone, if you get it, you know, if you take this guy, you know, we don't manage this. Oh, check. Good thing I checked. Lights on. Dead battery. It was so dark in here I had to turn the light on. In any case, I'll figure out how to get
cell
that.
phone booster right behind you. So
Perfect. Solar right there. So, you know, we can't. I'm not gonna worry about that. We can't control your cell phone, but you as an operator can. When we have a fiber break, communication break that puts us onto a backup radio system, your fiber modem that's in your house, your fixed wireless device that's in your house that we can manage, we do something called whitelisting and blacklisting. Put that simply, that basically means there's a level of control that we have on what traffic comes over it. So what we can shut off is Netflix, YouTube, all those other things that are bandwidth hogs, and we just shut them down. So they won't work. However, what we can whitelist are voice communications, and that even goes down to some of you who maybe use Wi-Fi calling on your fiber modem. that will be whitelisted and brought through. So we can control that traffic, and we have the failover mechanism. So when this does occur, and we're running on constricted bandwidth, we implement that immediately. And then there's also a priority in that, so that we traffic out the county stuff first, so the emergency services and county has priority in that, and then we put the cellular traffic right behind that. The problem is though, because I don't manage your device, your cell phone, is you could jump on and still pull up Netflix and be like, I don't care what's happening, I'm still getting Game of Thrones tonight, and that will put strain on the bandwidth. Now, what's kind of interesting and something we learned last year, when the rat chewed through, or the squirrel, I guess it was, chewed through the fiber cable anacortes and knocked us off, was the sites are designed so that when they see upstream that they don't have the bandwidth that they normally have, and they start to reach capacity, they bounce. So the site purposefully shuts off, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how big the site is, to reboot back up. The reason it does that is because it sees the user, and it kicks the site off so that they stop doing what they're doing. What it's trying to do is just go, I can't handle whatever's happening, and I'm going to reset and hopefully that person gets frustrated and stops doing that kind of thing, right? And we've had discussions with some of the tech folks over on the other side that say maybe we'll move that to a user device. But the problem is, how do you tell the site we're in an emergency situation, restrict it to shut down all those things too? That's hard to roll out in short length of time. So bottom line is, when you compare it to the phone system, compared to what we have here, I think what you'll find is Opalco has really paid attention to the redundancy facet of this. That's critical, but there's something else that I think we can touch on if we want to move to the next slide. There's also we don't necessarily see everything that happens emergency service-wise here, and we're all talking about the subduction zone, and that's a big thing. And that's going to be coming from state or federal level as far as emergency services are concerned. But locally, we can still have things that happen. And I'm speaking. This is kind of something that's on the cusp of kind of moving forward. And Scott has been involved in it as a chief. All the districts, the public works department, and sheriff have been working on radio communication projects. And this has been years in the making, but there's finally poised on just a June 2nd meeting with the council, hopefully a decision made on moving forward with this communication system, which provides actual radio communication using the foundation of the fiber and the LT or the joint use wireless poles that have been built by Rock Island and Opalco. So what's really cool about that is that we've got sites that now propagate LTE in 95% of the county, and using that same foundation for communications over the fiber network, we can add onto that an LMR, UHF and VHF system for emergency services.
That's land mobile radio.
Sorry, yeah, Gregg's my acronym describer. So here, and honestly, when it comes to the radio network at that level, you ask a question, I'm going to look right at this guy. That is not our expertise, but what we do is backhaul, redundancy and failover. The system that we worked with a company called Codan, who was given rewarded the proposal to come up with a state